Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to this talk about a woman called Grace Murray Hopper. My name is Daniel. Yeah, let's just start by looking at the woman in question. Her name was initially Grace Brewster Murray, and she was born in 1906 in December. She had two younger siblings, and her parents, they were an insurance salesman, her father, and her mother was a teacher, I think. Now, she was a very curious person, and her parents, they wanted her to use that curiosity, and they wanted her to learn and not necessarily follow in the path that most women went into in these days, which was just to get married and have a family. Now, her mother, she was very keen into her studying more, and so she inherited that from her. Her father, he was a big humorist, and the fact that he had to be that his legs had to be amputated when she was maybe 10 years or so. That didn't stop him. He just said, okay, that means I don't have to put on any more socks. So yeah, so he had some humor, and she also inherited that trait from him. Now her parents were from Scotland and the Netherlands, I think. So there were some traits that she inherited from that. For instance, her great-grandfather, he was a rear admiral in the U.S. Navy, and we'll come back to that later. As I said, she was very curious, and when she was 7, she started wondering how the hell does an alarm clock work? And she took her own clock and dismantled it, and then she tried to put it back together, and figuring that while she was figuring out how she was working. Now that didn't quite get according to plan. She couldn't put it back together. And what do you do when you get into that situation? You find another clock and you take that one apart just to see how you can put the first one back together. That didn't quite work again. So in the end, she had dismantled 7 clocks in her home. Now, luckily, her parents, they wanted her to be curious, so they didn't actually how to say skamma. So she wasn't punished for this, but she was only allowed to have 1 clock to fiddle with after that. And there's a quote by her which is on the slide. It is better to beg forgiveness than ask permission, and this is maybe something that quite well, yeah. I often connect the story about the alarm clocks with this, because obviously, if she had asked, okay, can I dismantle 7 alarm clocks, she would have gotten a no, obviously. But yeah, I believe that this incident was quite helpful for her later on, as we will see. Now, she went into Vassar College, and she graduated from there in 1928, actually with both a mathematics and a physics degree. She didn't actually make it into the school at first because she didn't have enough Latin experience, and for some reason she was not that much of a language person. So, for instance, when she was studying, she was supposed to learn German, and she had some problem with that. So she bought mathematics books in German and English and used that to study German. Now, she completed her master's in 1930, and then she got her PhD in 1934, and this was from Yale University. There seems to be some misunderstanding regarding this on the internet, because many claim that she was the first woman to do so, but I think she was number 11 in the in the sequence. I think the first woman to get a PhD was, she got at around 1881 or something like that. But anyway, so, there were not that many women. However, at this time, it was actually relatively, what do we say, more common for women to get a PhD than later on. So the same percentage of women getting a PhD, it was not attained again until in 1980s or so. And then she began teaching at Vassar University. She started teaching in 1931 and was teaching there until 1943. And she was a very good teacher, and most of the classes she taught, they became very popular. She was very hardworking. She wanted to ensure that the students they would learn what they were studying. Now she was, even though that language was maybe not her strongest side, she wanted her students to get good at writing, for instance. So even in mathematics classes, she would let them write essays about something that they were studying. Yes, now she got married in 1930. Her husband, called Vincent Foster Hopper, he was also a teacher. I think he was an English teacher. Now, as I said, she was hardworking. He was also hardworking. So they, much of their time was spent just working and teaching. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that contributed to the fact that they divorced in 1942, although the divorce didn't finalize until 1945. I don't know about that. She actually never did talk much about the divorce or why they divorced. They did not have any children. She did not have any children after the fact that she divorced. And she didn't marry again, although there are stories that she did have some relationships, but yeah, she did not marry, at least. And we don't know if it was the Pearl Harbor incident or what it was that actually got her to enroll in the Navy, but apparently it was around that time, 1941, 1942, then that she thought, okay, maybe I should change sceneries. And she applied for the Navy, and the Navy was the only option for her because of her great-grandfather, because he was a rear admiral. However, she was quite old at the time, 37 years old, which was a little bit too old for the Navy. They said, we want younger people. And she was also very petite. She was only 5'3", and her weight was too little. She was not necessarily thin, but she was just very petite. Yeah, but somehow she managed to convince them that she would be useful in the Navy. So in 1943, she was accepted. She then went into a training, and in 1944, I think it was in May or June, then she was taken to Harvard, where a man called Howard Aiken was working. The first thing that he said to her was, "Where the hell have you been?" And okay, he was probably, well, I don't know how to put it. Maybe he was not the easiest man to work around with, but the fact that he said that this was the first thing that he said was probably because he wanted her to come to him much earlier, because he had already heard that she was coming and he knew what she was capable of, having a PhD in mathematics. But she was taken into some training where she had to learn how to recognize battleships and something like that. So he just wanted her to come much earlier. Now, Aiken himself, he was professor, or he had finished his PhD in physics in 1939 or something like that. And in his studies, he encountered some differential equations that were too complex to calculate by hand. And he wanted to build a machine that could do this, and he got help from IBM, and they started working on this machine, Harvard Mark I, in 1937, and in 1943-44 it was first used. And as you can see, it was quite a big machine, 765,000 separate parts and more than 800 kilometers of wires. Now, it was a machine that was capable of executing various instructions, so addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. There were no, I don't think it was capable of performing if statements, but it was possible to write loops with it by using physical loops, because it was programmed using paper tape. So if you just fed a paper tape that was in a loop, then you could use a loop. And yeah, 3 additions per second, while more complex operations they took maybe 15 seconds. So I think that was multiplication, and then logarithmic operations they took maybe a minute or so. Now, Grace Murray Harper, she was just thrown into the room where this machine was and said, "Okay, you have 1 week to learn how to operate this." And at least I like to think that the alarm clock incident was helpful for her, because there she had a machine, and she actually described it, I think, as the most beautiful piece of gadget that she had ever seen, something like that. Now, and yes, she got a week to learn how to use it and program it, and she did that, and was very early on. The whole department depended on her to operate the machine. Now, there are stories that at one point there was some personnel from the Navy that came to see how the machine was operating. Unfortunately, there was some bug that was plaguing them, so it didn't quite work as it should have done. So it was turning itself off after a few seconds. But she somehow just managed to lean up against the machine where the start button was, and that's just always pressing the button when the machine stopped. So they didn't notice anything. They thought that this was a successful demonstration of the machine. And the machine was mostly operated to calculate ballistics tables. So how to where you had cannons, and yeah, if you wanted to calculate how to adjust them to target a specific place. This machine was also used to solve some problems regarding the Manhattan Project. So the first nuclear bombs, they used some calculations that were performed by this machine. I don't think that Grace knew about this fact until after the war. But they were approached by John von Neumann, and he asked them to help them with that problem. Yeah, and Grace would later describe the machine as man's first attempt to build a machine that would assist the power of his brain rather than the strength of his arm. She was also somehow, ironically, she was asked to write a manual on how to operate the book. She didn't like that very much, which is, as I said, is ironic because she asked her students to write essays about the problems that she was teaching them. But she did, so she did write the manual. Now, this is a famous story, and it is often said that the term bug originates from, well, actually not this machine, it was the next version, Mark II. It is not quite correct because the term bug has been around for more than 100 years. There are reports that it was used by the personnel in Edison's laboratory, so it was used back then to describe when they had some malfunction. And as you can see in the image here, under the bug, where it's actually a moth, under that it says, first actual case of bug being found. So, I mean, that clearly indicates that the term bug had been used before. I'm told that this is the handwriting of Grace Murray Hopper herself. It is not clear if she was the one that found the actual bug or not. It was probably just one of her personnel, but she was, just like the others, always actively fixing the machine, and she used to use a makeup mirror she had in her purse to take a look at various parts of the machine. Now, after the war, she was in Harvard for a little bit longer, but then she moved over to the Eckert-Mockley group, which was working on a machine called UNIVAC. And this was, as you can see, much more powerful. It had the capability to perform 1,000 instructions per second. But just like the Mark I and Mark II machines, it was programmed just using binary code. And at this time, Grace had this idea that we could create code in English and feed that to the computer. And I think it's safe to say that there were not many other people that were as certain about this as she was. Anyway, she wrote the first compiler in 1951 to 1952 called A0, and calling it a compiler is maybe a little bit of a overstatement because it was more of a linker, and I was unable to find any examples of code that was used for the A0 compiler. So it is not that easy to talk about a specific point in time or a specific version and say that this was the first compiler, because then there were several versions, A1, A2, A3, AT3, etc. And FLOW-MATIC is this one, B0. And this is probably what we can consider the first proper compiler. And this is an example of the code that could be fed to it. I would also like to demonstrate the browser that was used to advertise both this the UNIVAC machine and FLOW-MATIC. And I mean, it has got the 1950s written all over it, as you can see. It's a beautiful piece of, yeah. Anyway, then we have the COBOL language. It has been said that Grace created this language, and that's not entirely correct. However, she was very influential. She was one of the two technical advisors because the COBOL language was designed by a board, and those that have programmed in it, they can see, I mean, it's clearly something that was written by a group of people. So it would probably have been a much better idea to just let Grace design it completely. But yeah, this is how it went. So the committee had members from IBM as well, and FLOW-MATIC was probably the most influential part that went into the work, which where COBOL came from. Then I'm going to jump a little bit ahead in her story and move to the year 1983, and I'm going to show some 2 clips from an interview that she had in the TV show 60 Minutes.
Captain Hopper is a whiz at mathematics. Some would say a genius. One of that small band of brothers and sisters who ushered in the computer revolution. In World War II, at age 37, she left her professor's job at Vassar to serve as a lieutenant in the Navy Reserve. She was sent to Harvard to help program the very first computer. It had the unglamorous name of Mark I. And as far as we've progressed since this vacuum tube monster, Captain Hopper says, we ain't seen nothing yet.
We're just getting started. We're just beginning to meet what we will be doing in the future.
And as you can hear, she was perfectly aware of the fact that this was just the beginning, and that we would see much more computers and much smaller computers. In my research, I did see some papers from 1954 where she was arguing with, I think it was John McCarthy, and she was clearly of the opinion that we would have more smaller computers, but he was not as convinced at that point. And here's another snippet.
But if a woman wants to pursue mathematics in the Navy, it's a different story, correct?
Because women have always done mathematics.
Sorry?
Since the days of the Greeks.
You think they're better than men at mathematics?
No, just the same. Back in the old days when I went into the Navy, one of the first things we learned was the qualities of leadership. It was a two-way street. It was loyalty up and loyalty down. It's in people's attitude. If they keep wanting more and don't get it, they're probably going to be unhappy.
You don't have an ounce of nostalgia in you, do you?
No. I'm having a wonderful time. I'm very fortunate.
Yes, and she was perfectly aware of the fact that things were getting better gradually all the time. So she was not always reminiscing about the old times, how they were better, because she knew that they weren't. Now she quit the Navy 3 times, and this is a quote from her. I seem to do a lot of retiring, but because she was asked to come back 2 times, they simply couldn't be without her. So she quit in 1966, and then a few months later she was then just recalled to the Navy because there were some assignments that had to be done, and they had problems finishing them without her. And then again in 1971 and 1972. And then finally, in the year that she retired for the last time from the Navy, in 1986, she was promoted to Rear Admiral. And at that time, I think she was the oldest, highest officer in the Navy. And then in her last few years, I think it was 1986 to 1990, she was working for Digital Equipment Corporation. As a consultant, she was moving, or she was giving lectures all around the country. And she continued using her Navy uniform for that. Now, there are some interesting things about Grace. For instance, she was a heavy knitter. She used to use meetings to knit, and she would be looking at her at the prjónar. But she was listening all the time. She never missed anything that was happening during the meeting. And also the fact that she was a heavy smoker. This is probably the only thing that I would have disliked about her. And I think it's interesting too that this iconic picture that was taken of her, that she has a cigarette in her fingers at that time. Now, this is also something that she was very famous for. She used to demonstrate the length of a nanosecond, and she used to do that in a very obvious way. She brought a piece of wire that was approximately 30 centimeters long and said, this is the the distance that a signal can move in 1 nanosecond. Let's see that as well.
They started talking about circuits that acted in nanoseconds, billionths of a second. Oh, I didn't know what a billion was. I don't think most of those men downtown know what a billion is either. And if you don't know what a billion is, how on earth do you know what a billionth is? I fussed and fumed. Finally, one morning, in total desperation, I called over to the engineering building, and I said, please cut off a nanosecond and send it over to me. And I've brought you some today. Now, what I wanted when I asked for a nanosecond was, I wanted a piece of wire which would represent the maximum distance that electricity could travel in a billionth of a second. Now, of course, it wouldn't really be through wire. It'd be out in space, velocity of light. So if you start with the velocity of light and use your friendly computer, you'll discover that a nanosecond is 11.8 inches long. The maximum limiting distance that electricity can travel in a billionth of a second. Finally, at the end of about a week, I called back and said, I need something to compare this to. Could I please have a microsecond? I've only got 1 microsecond, so I can't give you each one. Here's a microsecond. 984 feet. I sometimes think we ought to hang one over every programmer's desk or around their neck so they know what they're throwing away when they throw away microseconds. Now, I hope you'll all get your nanoseconds. They're absolutely marvelous for explaining to wives and husbands and children and admirals and generals and people like that. An admiral wanted to know why it took so damn long to send a message via satellite. And I had to point out that between here and the satellite, there were a very large number of nanoseconds. You can explain these things. It's really very helpful, so be sure to get your nanoseconds.
And she would also, in the later years, she would also say, demonstrate the size of a picosecond. And she brought a little parcel and said, well, they are selling these picoseconds down at McDonald's. They call it pepper, but yeah. Now, this the sentence, we've always done it that way. This is something that she absolutely hated. And this is the clock that she had in her office. As you can see, it goes backwards, and the hands, they move backwards. I don't know about you, but have you noticed how big the space is between 12 and 1? I'm not sure if this is something that we would notice generally, unless it had been flipped. Yeah, but I mean, once you start thinking about it, is there anything that says that clocks have to move clockwise? I don't think so. And I think it's a very good way to think about things. We don't actually have to do things the same way that we have always done. Now, there are a number of quotes that have been told by her, and we have seen a few of them already. For instance, this one: "It is better to beg forgiveness than ask permission." And this one, which was in the first clip from the 60-minute interview: "Leadership is a two-way street, loyalty up and loyalty down," which basically says the top-ranking people, they also have to be loyal to their bottom-ranking people. And this one: "The wonderful thing about standards is that there are so many of them to choose from." I think that's also quite correct. And this is also very good. A ship in port is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. Very clear. And also this one here: "A business accounts receivable file is much more important than its accounts payable." Then she was just talking about how information can be, well, some information is very critical, while other information is not. So, I mean, if you lose the information of what bills you have to pay, doesn't really matter, does it? Yes, you will be reminded. Yeah. Now, she did get a few awards, and here I'm just mentioning a few of them. This is the first one is an award that she got in 1946 or 8 or something like that. And then in 1969, she was the first person to receive these awards. Computer Science Man of the Year. It's somehow ironic that she was a woman, but what the word man was in it. And when she quit the Navy for the last time, she got the highest award at the Navy awards to a person that has not been in combat. And yeah, this is just a few of the multiple awards that she got. Now, a few things have been named after her. And the first thing I mentioned is the battleship USS Hopper, which was launched in 1996. It was announced in 1991, I think, that they were going to build a ship and name it after her a few months before she died. Then this supercomputer, the Cray XE6 Hopper supercomputer. Now, the Grace Murray Hopper Awards, which were awarded in 1971, I think, for the first time. As you can see, there's a little-known man called Donald Knuth that got that award. It's interesting that it has not been awarded for every year since that. I don't know why. And as you can see on her Wikipedia page, there are various streets and buildings and all kinds of stuff that have been named after her as well. So it's pretty obvious that she was, well, people respected her a lot. And when she was asked what was your greatest achievement, she would usually name two things: that the fact that she created the compiler, and that she taught a lot of young people, and she was very proud of that. She used to say that the young people, and she defined young people as all people half of her age or younger than that. She would say that those were the future, and they would usually ask more questions and be well, better suited to solve problems. Yeah, and that's about what I have to say about Grace Murray Hopper. Do you have any questions about that? I'm not saying I will be able to answer them, but feel free to ask if there is anything.
So she was instrumental in designing COBOL.
Yes.
So I think perhaps some of the young people in the audience, they might not know what COBOL is. Can you tell them?
Can I tell?
We all do,
Can I tell them what COBOL is?
yes.
Well, I can at least.
What it's used for.
Yes, I mean it's one of the languages that was used very much in business, and probably a lot of the software that is being used today is running COBOL, even though we may not see much of it in academy today. Do you have any more information about, or did you want me to?
It's one of the early database programming languages.
Yeah.
That data manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're absolutely right. There's still a lot of code
Yes.
running as we speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just like there's a hell of a lot of Fortran code running.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
One of these is that it's very verbose.
Yes.
It's a lot of text. There's no such thing as a pure code.
Oh, exactly. And I think that, I mean, we can see a glimpse of it here, even though this is not COBOL, but it was and is probably a lot like this one. Yeah, very similar to this one. Yeah. Okay. Anything?
Also, Google runs a yearly event for women in computer science. It's called the Grace Hopper event.
Okay, something different from.
Women get together.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there's a.
I think there are about 3,000-4,000, maybe more.
Yeah, a conference or something like that. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yes, she got a Google grant. So
Yes.
it's a major event,
Yeah, it is.
sponsored by Google.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then I just say thank you very much for your time.